Okay, welcome back. We are live, part two of the summit hosted by Tucker Carlson. So, I don't know how many of you were able to join me earlier today, but we, excuse me, got to watch Tucker Carlson interview three of the Republican candidates who are running for president in 2024. We watched him interview Tim Scott and Asa Hutchinson and Mike Pence. All three of which fell on their face, embarrassed themselves, and basically excluded themselves from potentially winning the presidency. Tucker he went in hard on all of them and he asked good questions. And let's see if I can remember how each one failed. I've been at the gym, so my mind has not been on thinking about digesting all the stuff that we watched this morning. Tim Scott failed on gosh, what thing was it that he just jumped off the bat and immediately missed on? I know Asa, it was the gender stuff. Mike Pence missed on the January 6th stuff and saying that the economy's suffering and everybody dealing with inflation and the homelessness and the crime and the drugs, all that stuff. It's not his problem. It's, he lost when he said that. Gosh, I can't remember what Tim Scott said. That was basically automatically excluding him from potentially winning the 2024 race. But we now have three more to watch. It's gonna, excuse me, it's gonna be Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Ron DeSantis, who is probably I wouldn't say dark horse candidate, but he's like the second in line in terms of likelihood that he would actually get the nomination for the Republican Party. Of course, Trump is the only candidate that did not show for this event. And we talked about that earlier about whether or not it was in his best interest to show. Um, don't really want to rehash all that again, but I am looking forward to watching these next three interviews. And we'll talk about, I'll pause it as they provide their commentary and just some of the themes of the 2024 election cycle that you should be listening for that we demand answers about are the situation with the economy and inflation and energy independence, that being tied directly to inflation. We want to hear about a resolution for the war in Ukraine, which is only going the opposite direction right now. We have now increased the threat level to where we're sending our reserve troops over there. That just was announced the day before yesterday. Joe Biden announced that he is activating our reserve troops for duty in Europe. So we want to see an end to the Ukraine war immediately. We want to see a end to the financial aid. We obviously don't want to see any of our actual boots on the ground. None of our sons and daughters fighting a war to die in Ukraine. So we want to hear a resolution about that. Obviously, the gender and LGBT stuff has to be addressed. I mean, I guess the T includes trans, but some people want to try to pretend as if these are two different arguments, that the trans stuff is out of control and the gay pride stuff is like, we don't want that, but we really got to take care of the trans stuff. No, it's all one category. The trans and the LGBT, there's a reason the T is in there. Even though the LGB want to start kicking the T out because they're bringing them bad publicity, the fact of the matter is sexual immorality, per the Bible, all of these things fall into that category. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, IA, plus two spirit, all this other stuff, pretending you can go from one gender to the other. Transgenderism, which is addressed in Deuteronomy 22:5, says a man shouldn't dress as a woman and a woman shouldn't dress as a man. All of the sexual immorality as a whole genre has to be addressed. So we're looking for these candidates to come out strong against that. And in my opinion, strong would be to condemn homosexuality, not this Tucker Carlson stance of, hey, we don't have a problem with gay marriage. And, look, if you want to be trans, just don't do it in front of the kids. That's the Tucker Carlson That's the neocon perspective. Whereas we, as devout Christians, we think that these things are, I mean, God calls them an abomination, for one. Before we even add our own interpretation or commentary, homosexuality and transgenderism are called abominations in the Bible. And that's in both the Old and New Testament. So that's the stance that we expect our Christian leaders to take, not just on the trans thing, but on gay marriage, on gay pride parades, on Pride Month. If I was a presidential candidate, I would be saying Pride Month comes to an end the moment I get in office. There are no more Pride Months. In fact, what I want to see from our society is that we do not celebrate or promote homosexuality, transgenderism, any kind of sexual immorality at all. It's not to say it's not going to happen. It's not to say that people aren't going to do these things in the privacy of their homes and in their bedrooms and gay strip clubs and even, straight strip clubs, all this stuff, that sexual immorality is just going to stop happening because a politician comes out strongly against it. We know that it's going to continue to happen. It's been happening ever since humankind has been on the planet. Ever since we fell from grace, story of Adam and Eve, since we invited sin into our lives, we've had to deal with sexual immorality. So it's nothing new, and it shouldn't be anything difficult to ask of people who claim that they're Christian and claim that they're good candidates to lead this nation. We should be asking them to say sexual immorality will not be promoted or tolerated in the public space. So it's not going to be promoted on our TV and on the radio and everywhere else that we interact and do consumerism. Homosexuality and any type of sexual deviancy has no role in that. It's definitely not going to be in our education system. So that's some of the stuff we're looking for them to talk about in terms of the gender stuff. We got to talk about race. We got to talk about the immigration and the demographic change in America. So I'm writing as I remember things that I should be listening for to make sure I understand where each of these candidates stands on these issues. We talked in the earlier show this afternoon. If you watched that, I was streaming for 4 hours, and we talked for quite a while about many different topics. The issues of race and immigration. Tucker Carlson calls it demographic change. The reason he says demographic change is bad is because it's a voters issue, a voters' rights issue. You have people in the country voting illegally, and that's, I guess, bad because people who couldn't vote are voting. Okay, yeah, I agree with that. But far, far, far more important is the fact that America is becoming less and less white year over year and has been for the last 5 decades. And the result of that demographic change is what you see all around us. The lowered standards in regards to how much crime we're willing to tolerate, what the sanitation of the cities we live in should be, what the economy should look like around us, we've settled for far less. And the measuring stick that I'm using to say that is historical European culture. When you look at the societies of not current Paris, but historical Paris, not current New York City, but historical New York City, these things used to look much, much different. There were actually standards in society. People were not having gay pride parades in the streets. People were not doing drugs in some kind of open air market, using and selling drugs. There weren't homeless people that you're having to step over every time you leave the house. These things aren't problems in first world countries of a European descent. But because we've allowed our country to become less and less populated of people of that descent and more populated of people from the third world descent, you're seeing the culture change in real time around us. So when we have a negative birth rate in America, including white people, meaning we're not even having enough white babies to replace the existing white population, and you're seeing the mass importation of third world country immigrants who are obviously not European. The simultaneous, those two things happening simultaneously, the negative population growth and the influx of immigration, it's spells the end of our country. It spells the end of Western society. Then this is happening all across Europe. It's happening across all of the traditionally white or predominantly white countries. So that needs to be addressed. And involved in the racial discussion are several subtopics. Affirmative action was just stricken down. We need to get back to saying that this is a colorblind meritocracy where, look, if you're black, Asian, anything other than white, we're not saying we're going to kick you out of the country. We don't want any harm to you. But we are saying if you're going to be here, you have to play by the same rules as everybody else. You don't get preferential treatment to get a job interview or to get into a school or to be hired for a job or to get into the school or whatever. You don't get preferential treatment based on your race. You just don't. So I think all conservatives are willing to say that now that the Supreme Court made their move publicly. But before the Supreme Court made their move, it was still like everybody walking on pins and needles around the race issue. The 13% of the population, black people, committing 50% of our crime, that should be discussed on a mainstream platform. And that's where, right at that line right there, where you start talking about here are the numbers on crime broken out by race, understanding the proportionality of each race within the country. They won't go there. Most politicians, all politicians, won't go there because they don't want to come off as white supremacists. They don't want to come off as racist. They don't want anybody to think that they're implying that black people are more violent than other races, even though they are. Even though you can objectively observe that across countries who are predominantly black, they have lower standards for what they tolerate in terms of violence. That's just true. More murder, more rape, more assault, etc. So we don't want our country to be more like Africa. We don't want our country to be more like Mexico, and we don't want our country to be more like China. We don't want any of these things, yet we're told multiculturalism, we have to bring in these other cultures and these other people because somehow that's going to make America better. We've already run the experiment. We've been the melting pot country now for 200 plus years. As the country has become less white, only taking the last 50 years to do so, it was 90% white in the 1970s. Go down to now, 2023, we're talking 60% white. And you see that every standard of living around you has devolved. So that's where the race conversation needs to be had. We need to talk about globalism. Globalism being the idea pushed from the World Economic Forum that says ideally the whole world would be run by one centralized government. And that government would make decisions for all of the nations. That way you can have a consistent approach to world events, such as global pandemics and climate change. Those are the two big things they say, oh, we have to have a world government so that we can respond in a way that's consistent across nations. But what you're saying is you then hand over authority of your medical care system and of your economy to a global authority who has more say so than your nation's government, your federal government, your state's government. We can't have that. We just can't tolerate that. We're not for that. We're for national sovereignty, not just for America, but for all these other countries. So we have to talk about stopping globalism in its tracks, or at least how globalism impacts America or our participation in that greater effort. And then it's a dead subject, in my opinion, by now. I was kind of not enjoying hearing them talk about January 6th again 2 years after the event when he talked to Mike Pence about it. But I mean, there are things there that the mainstream has written down in the history books that are false. The innocent people who died that day defending our country. The only person that died that day was Ashley Babbitt, who was an insurrectionist, according to CNN, or you would just say a protester. And she was shot by our government. So, sorry, I got a notification on my phone. Had to see what that was all about. They talked a little bit about January 6th, and we all know none of us ever actually got to see the 40,000 hours of tape that was promised us. That Marjorie Taylor Greene and what is his name? Not Mike Pence, it's the other dude, Mike McConnell, Mitchell McConnell, whatever his name is, McConnell, as the leader of the Republicans in the House, I believe, said that that was one of his campaign promises. If you put him as head of the Republicans in the House, then, or the Congress, I can't remember which one, then he would get us all those tapes. Well, lo and behold, here we are a year later, and we've seen a whopping like 5 minutes worth of footage from January 6th. And the reason being, we know that the federal government was involved as an agitator of that event. You had people like Ray Epps instigating the crowd and telling them they needed to go into the Capitol and telling them they needed to break down the doors, break down the barriers. So when you have your own government telling its people to have a riot, there's kind of a conflict of interest there. You can't be provocateurs of a crime and then arrest somebody for the crime. So those are just some of the topics. That's like 7 different things that need to be addressed in these interviews, and Tucker's really only able to hit maybe 3 of them per individual. He's kind of not gone over much about the economy and the inflation. He's done more about Ukraine, the gender thing, and January 6th. So we'll see what these last 3 candidates have to say about these subjects, and hopefully Tucker asking about these subjects. So let's jump in. I believe first up is Nikki Haley. We'll see what her presidential run has in for it here.
Thank you for doing this.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
And congratulations on your run. So as you think about running for president, I'm sure you think about the last election and what happened. Historic numbers for the current president. 81 million votes. 15 million more than Barack Obama. Twice the population of New York City more than Barack Obama. What do you think of that?
In terms of Biden?
Yeah. 81 million votes. They are saying that Joe Biden got 81 million votes. And my question is, do you accept that? And second, how do you think he did that?
I mean, all I care about is changing that. Like, we can't afford a President Kamala Harris. I will say that over and over.
Amen.
And we have to do everything we can to make sure that that happens.
But as a mechanical question, it's not a trick question, it's just like the mechanics of it, something you're thinking about since you're running. I don't think anyone would say Joe Biden was a great candidate.
No.
Didn't campaign.
He didn't campaign at all.
He was not a figure who commanded respect among Democrats. They made fun of him. I'm not attacking the guy, but it's true.
Right.
Nobody in Washington said, I want my kid to grow up to be Joe Biden. And yet, at the end, he's got 81 million votes. 15 million more than Barack Obama, who, whatever you think of him, was a very talented politician, and I think smart. So, like, how did he do that? And what can we learn from that?
Well, what you can learn from it is what we did in South Carolina. I said in South Carolina, if you've got to show picture ID to buy Sudafed, if you've got to show picture ID to get on a plane, you should have to show picture ID to protect the integrity of the election process.
So,
you know, and we have to make sure election integrity is something we don't ever stop. You have to continue over and over. We've had some states who've done some great things and they've put voter ID in place, and that's been great. We still have some other states who haven't done anything, and we need to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to. I mean, we saw during COVID, a lot of people, a lot of secretaries of state changed rules without getting state legislative support. We saw a lot of that happening. We saw a lot of mail-out balloting. We've got to make sure we continue to fight to make sure we have integrity in the election process. Because I saw at the United Nations, when you have your people lose faith in an election system, that's the first crack of a country falling apart. We have to keep fighting for this. We have to make sure we get it done.
yes. So when I asked about this 81 million votes, you immediately said things I think I agree with about election integrity. Yeah. So are you suggesting that that'll last election? It sounds like you're saying you don't think it was on the level.
Are you talking about the presidential?
That's correct, the presidential.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all know that there were irregularities in there and that there were some issues that happened. We know that there was mail-out balloting that shouldn't have happened. Do I think that changed the results of the election? No. I mean, I think President Biden ended up winning the election. But I think at the end of the day, it showed we've got a lot of work to do in terms of election integrity.
So you mentioned mail.
So that last part there is very, very important. Like, people who are paying attention just wrote down the note that said she disagrees with Trump. She thinks the election had irregularities, but at the end of the day was fine. It wasn't stolen or anything like that. And that's just a hard disagreement with Trump loyalists. Trump loyalists are going to say the election was stolen. It is what it is. They use the methods that they just talked about: ballot harvesting, the voting machines, and the mail-out ballots to manipulate and get themselves enough votes to beat a historically highly voted president. Like, that's the thing, is Biden got 80 whatever votes, but Donald Trump got 70-something million himself, which is also more than Barack Obama had ever gotten, and was more than Trump got in 2016. So Trump also got historically high voter turnout. It's just that, shucks, somehow 15 million extra voters showed up, not because of the ballot harvesting and not because of the mail-out ballots. That's definitely not why. And all of those went to Joe Biden, who didn't even run a presidential campaign and was largely absent for the entire 2 years of campaigning. So that's why you got to decide which side of the fence you're on. You got to decide, yes, it was more likely that the election had illegal interference. Or you can say nothing illegal happened. There's some things we should maybe change, but hey, each state's doing their best and we got to try harder. And it sounds like that's what she's saying. We shall continue, though.
Mail-in ballots. Would you restrict that if you're president?
Yeah, I don't believe in mail-out ballots. I mean, if you do absentee ballots, in South Carolina, what we did is we did voter ID. We did absentee ballots, but you had to verify they were who they were. You matched up signatures. We counted them as they came in, so there should be no reason you're getting results 2 weeks out. That should never happen. And you have to make sure that people, and you have to keep cleaning your rolls so that dead people don't vote. I mean, that's a huge thing that we've got to do. And so I think we should always keep pushing for that.
So electronic voting machines, I think, are the majority of voting in America. It takes place on electronic voting machines. And I know that there are municipalities that haven't received access to the software that runs those machines. Why would that be, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy if everybody just did paper ballots and then we were done.
Yeah. Do you think that that's, I think most people would agree with that. Do you think that that's something that governors should push for?
I mean, I think that you need to show the people of your state that they can trust the system. I always put a lot of weight in that in South Carolina. I wanted to make sure that every South Carolinian knew.
Sorry, guys, I was alerted of a news headline from 3 hours ago that I want to share real quick. Let me jump over to my Instagram, and I'll share a screen so you guys can see what I'm looking at. That is classic. I'm reading some comments on it. Oh, we'll read them on screen. How about that? Flip over here to Instagram. Flip over to my stories. And loading. Loading. We're struggling. What's going on here, Instagram? Right there. Look at that. Okay, headline is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is running for president on the Democrat ticket, says that COVID-19 was specifically engineered to avoid harming Jews. Coming from Ground News is reporting this. It's coming from actually 18 sources, and they're saying that how Ground News works, if you guys have never seen this Instagram account, this bar graph on the bottom here is explaining that of the 18 sources, 61% of those sources come from the left, 22% come from the right, and then kind of middle ground sources are reporting 17%. So this is obviously a much more newsworthy headline for people on the left. So let's read what this caption says. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. baselessly claimed that COVID-19 may have been ethnically targeted to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. The longtime vaccine skeptic and conspiracy theorist who is running for president as a Democratic Party challenger made the comments during a press event in New York City on Tuesday per the New York Post. COVID-19, there is an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately, Kennedy said. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. We don't know whether it was deliberately targeted or not, but there are papers out there that show the racial and ethnic differential and impact. Kennedy claimed, but did not cite any specific sources, and this is according to Business Insider. Wow. Wow, that's really interesting news. My grandmother is a survivor. She got COVID twice. I'm Jewish. I got COVID. I know Jews who died from COVID. This is medieval conspiracy theory that led to the death of thousands of Jews. It's dangerous and incorrect, and the study he references doesn't once mention Jewish or Chinese people. Recall all throughout the pandemic, the left was telling you certain communities of color were disproportionately affected, and now he says it, and it's crazy. Big brain time. Thanks for this extremely biased take that he already addressed clearly on Twitter. Have fun anti-Semitism baiting while we actually have nuanced conversations about the ethics of gain-of-function research. And mainstream media is really saying that this guy is a threat to Biden. What a effing joke. So that's a pretty funny headline that I saw peeing on my phone. I just had to share. You guys know what I think about the JQ, the Jewish question. Hopefully you guys know the difference. And how do I explain that? Well, he mentioned specifically Ashkenazi Jews. You need to understand that those are different Jews than the historical Jews who created Judaism, who came from Judea. Ashkenazi Jews are not the same Jews. So if you don't know that, you should go research what the difference is between those two parties. And you'll find some interesting content there. All right, back to the YouTube stream of Nikki Haley laying out how we're going to fix our elections. Hope you guys have a beverage. I have this. What flavor? What is this called? This is obviously it's the purple orange, but it's called ultraviolet, which it tastes kind of grapey. I want to say it's grape flavor. I think that's grape. I'm not sure. It's not my favorite. It's definitely not like top 3 or maybe even top 5 Monster flavors. Obviously, Monster Ultra, the classic white, that's going to be our number 1. It's not what's on the outside of the can. It's what's inside. Watermelon is quite tasty. I actually really like my favorite energy beverages are of the Rockstar variety. In particular, the Rockstar Recovery Orange. That is my diehard favorite. It's like not carbonated and it's kind of juicy, but it's not as high calorie as the normal actual juice ones. It's got like B vitamins in it. It's good stuff. But anyway, back to Nikki Haley. Let's figure out what she has to say about fixing these elections.
Knew that we had fair elections, that we had verified elections, and that we were making sure that there were no dead people voting and no people duplicate voting. And I think every governor should make sure that that doesn't happen in their states. And I think that you also go a step further. Congress should also have oversight of election integrity to make sure if we have to change things. A lot happened during COVID. Learn those lessons and say, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? I think we've got some opportunities there.
It doesn't seem to be happening, though.
No, it doesn't. But what has Congress done for you lately?
Fair. Well, as last question on this. I'm just interested, since you've been traveling, obviously you're running, all around the country, is this question, the question whether the elections are fair, whether your vote is counted, is this top of mind for Republican voters in your experience?
I think Republican voters want to have faith in their system, and I think there's still a lot of questions out there. I think they're still concerned that those things that happened during that election don't happen again. And that's why I think governors need to step up and make sure that they're doing the things, and some governors have done a great job. You have the best governor in the country, by the way. Kim Reynolds knocks it out of the park all the time. But I do think this is a responsibility that we should have. It's a democracy. And in a democracy, you want to make sure everybody has their vote. But more than that, the people need to trust the government that is doing those elections. And so we have to go and make sure that they have faith in that.
One of the things that we've learned, thank you for saying that, one of the things that we've learned in the almost 3 years since the last election is that various government agencies, intel agencies, law enforcement, FBI, CIA, NSA, were involved in shaping public opinion about the last election. They interfered with our election. And that suggests to a lot of people that maybe those agencies have too much unchecked power. You've worked in government. What do you think?
Well, yes, that's true. You know, when I was governor, I went and replaced the heads of every agency. It's the first thing I did when I came to office. It's the first thing a president should do, is you control what you can control, and you start with your agency. So I replaced the heads of every agency. I made sure they were people, some didn't vote for me, but they were people who knew that sector. So if it was veterans, it was someone who knew the challenges of veterans. If it was tourism, it was someone who knew heads and beds, people on golf courses. They knew what they needed to do, and I did that across the board. But the second thing I did is I put people in every agency. I sent in teams into every agency to clean it up, pull down regulations, down old issues, get rid of problem children. So in some cases, we had to tweak agencies. In other cases, we had to gut agencies. If you look at the American people don't trust our intelligence agencies, they don't trust our Department of Justice, so you can't just replace the person at the top. You've got to go through and really look at gutting those agencies and getting out a lot of that senior management and things that happen.
I think it's a really good point.
More than that, you have to understand that every action you take matters. So I'll give you an example. When I was at the United Nations, my very first week, someone got on the phone with the press and told them what I was going to do. None of it was what I was going to do. And so I called my staff and I said, who is this? And get rid of them. You're not going to believe who it was. John Kerry's sister. John Kerry's sister worked at the U.S. mission at the United Nations. And I said, get rid of her. And they said, you can't. She's here for 6 more months. And I said, you take her key pass, you take her computer, and we will pay her to sit at home, but she is not to walk back into this building.
Wow. Well, then
you have to be willing to really do the things to shake it up. The next thing that we have to do is, I know presidents typically meet with their governors once a year. I will meet with my governors once every quarter with the sole goal of get the power that's at the federal government, push it down to the states. That's how you empower people, is pushing it down. And you push it down. That can be education, that can be health care, that can be benefits. When I was governor in South Carolina, we had thousands of people on welfare. I went, and instead of them sitting on the couch, I went to our businesses and I said, look, if you will take this person and train them, I will pay this X number of weeks, and then you decide if you want to hire them. We moved 35,000 people from welfare to work. I went into our prison systems, and I wanted to know how they got in, what we did to them when they were there, and what we did when they came out. We went in, we put in computer classes. We taught them financial planning. We gave them faith-based classes if they wanted them. But we put equipment behind the fence, and we trained them. Now in South Carolina, when somebody leaves the fence, they've got a job to go to the next day. We have the lowest recidivism rate in the country.
What? I'm wondering, I wasn't going to bring this up, and this is not something that you did, but I just was noticing it, that homelessness in South Carolina has risen dramatically recently, as it has in a lot of places around the country. It's a sign of obvious failure. If your citizens are living on the street and dying of drug ODs and no one notices, then it's not working. Why do you think that's happening? And what can government do about it?
Well, first, that's your Bidenomics for you. I mean, let's make sure that people cannot afford things. And I'll tell you the one thing that's more shameful than anything as a military spouse, 33,000 of our heroes are homeless today. That's shameful. We should never treat our veterans that way. But you look at homelessness otherwise, and America has refused to deal with the cancer that is mental health. 1 in 4 people have a mental health issue. But if treated, they can live a perfectly normal life. The problem is, and you look at our veterans, 1 in 3 suffer from PTSD or thoughts of suicide. But right now, if you look at it, if somebody knows they have an issue, which a lot of our teenagers do and young adults do, they can't find a therapist because we don't have enough. There aren't enough treatment centers. If someone with a mental health issue doesn't get help, they get into an addiction. There aren't enough addiction centers. And oh, by the way, if you happen to be one of those blessed ones that gets it, insurance doesn't cover it. We have got to do this. We're losing Americans every day just because of that. And the homelessness is a lot of that. I saw that, you'll see in South Carolina, they'll take people that have mental health issues and they'll put them in jail for 48 hours, or they'll send them to the hospital for 48 hours. That's not doing anything to treat these people and the challenges that they have.
Well, so what would you do if you don't send them to a therapist?
Well, we have to get mental health treatment. We should have telehealth all over the country, one for our veterans, but for people who need real-time help, they should be able to get a doctor on their computer or phone at any given time.
But there's never been a higher percentage of Americans on prescribed psychiatric drugs, benzodiazepines and amphetamines. It's the highest it's ever been, and SSRIs. And the suicide rate keeps going up. So is there a point at which we say this isn't working, this treatment that we're offering?
Well, now you're talking about something totally different. I mean,
but that is the treatment for most people.
We have a broken healthcare system, and we have to make sure that we completely tear it up, from the insurance companies to the hospitals to the doctors to the PBMs to the pharmaceutical companies, because right now, doctors love to just prescribe. They love to give drugs, they love to do whatever. But doctors are never judged on the outcomes. Doctors need to, rather than us looking at how many appointments they have, how many prescriptions they write, what about if we talked about the outcomes? What did you do for that patient? Did that patient get better? That's the method that we should start looking at for healthcare. And then people need to have options. My mom, I take care of my parents. They're 87 and 89. My mom was in the hospital. She had no say in what that hospital bill was. They brought her Tylenol she didn't want, and they said, well, you're going to pay for it anyway. You might as well take it. You have an insurance company and a hospital negotiating that, and she is nowhere in that conversation. So we will make it all transparent, make those insurance companies have to show us what they're doing, make those hospitals show us what they're doing, make these doctors have to say what they're doing and the outcomes, and let's make sure pharmaceutical companies suddenly have to show us what they do. When we
So I figured I'd pause it and jump in here since he's been ranting for a couple of minutes. And hey, actually, rant is the wrong word. She's responded to every question Tucker asked with very poll-approved answers. Stuff people want to hear. We need to talk about the mental health crisis. All this mental illness. What are we going to do with it? How do we treat it? Where is it coming from? She's talking a lot about what are we going to do with it and how to treat it. She's not talking about where it's coming from. And the treatment she's prescribing is we have to give them psychologists and make sure they're getting the right drugs. And that doesn't fix mental illness. Those are both Band-Aids. There are people who think psychology fixes depression. Okay, well, how long have we had psychology and has depression gone down a single year? There's your answer. People are not spiritually connected to their creator. As Christians, this is what we believe. As our Christian nationalist platform, as our Christian futurism platform, whatever you want to call it, people who want to see America be Christian again, we believe that the root of all suffering is evil and sin. And all this mental illness we're seeing around us, is the result of people living sinfully, meaning that they are doing things that are corrupting their very integrity as humans. They're making decisions that are not what God would want them to do. They're not following Jesus Christ's preachings. That's why we're seeing this mental illness. I'm not going to sit here and say that PTSD and people being exposed to traumas and whatnot, that those aren't unique scenarios. But to sit there and say that 1 in 4 people, that's what she said, 1 in 4 people have some kind of mental illness. We've gone way too far on this whole idea of psychology and this concept of mental illness, as if we always knew about physical illnesses, right? You get a cold, you have the flu, you have strep, you have some kind of chronic disease, something you were born with. But this idea that 1 out of 4 human beings, that it's actually normal for 1 out of 4 human beings to become mentally ill, meaning they're not functioning at a cognitive level like a normal human being should function, that 25% of the entire population falls into that category because they're not getting the right psychology treatments and they're not getting the right drugs. No, that's not what's going on. What's going on is an existential good and evil battle, and evil is winning. People don't believe in God anymore, so they're not asking God for what to do in their current situations in life. You get broken up with, you get laid off, you get diagnosed with a sudden illness like a real cancer or something like that. Tragedy becomes of your family, somebody gets in a car accident, somebody suddenly dies. All of these things that send people down dark pathways, if you don't have God in your life to pray with and to have some kind of dialogue with and to read his explanation as to why these things happen via the Bible, sitting down and reading the Bible, if you aren't doing that, you're going to look for answers as to why this suffering is happening in your life in a zillion other places. You're going to look for Jordan Peterson to explain it to you from some kind of psychobabble perspective. And I'm not sitting here saying everything Jordan Peterson says is wrong and that psychology is a useless topic, but I'm saying we've placed all of our eggs in the psychology basket in order to heal people, either the psychology or the pharmaceutical basket, which are just new age medicine, new age pseudosciences. Pharmaceuticals didn't exist 200 years ago. Psychology didn't exist 200 years ago. There were philosophers, but this mental illness concept that, oh, you are mentally ill, you have a sickness that affects your mind state that doesn't come from a physical ailment. It's not like you're in chronic pain because something happened to your knee, and because you're in chronic pain, you're in a bad mood and you're depressed. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that like an illness in your brain is what you have suddenly somehow contracted. And that's a very, very different conversation about how to heal that than the conversation she's trying to have about how we heal mental illness. So, everything else she's talked about so far, I mean, and I'll be honest, she's the best candidate so far, but Tucker hasn't asked her the hard questions. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the scrolling YouTube comments on the right there, but you can see people saying, we want to hear your answer for Ukraine. Because from my understanding, and I'm not fully researched on Nikki Haley, I'm not going to pretend to be, but what I suspect here is that she is a pro-Ukraine war person, that we're defending democracy and we have to do this in order to maintain our authority as number one in the world's military and all this other stuff. She's a warmonger, as they say. But let's continue and see if Tucker gets onto a more difficult question, because so far it's all been about homelessness, and the first thing she talked about was the election interference. So let's see how she does on some follow-up questions here.
We do that. If we just dealt with the insurance companies, we'd cut health care in half. So we have to do those things. Yeah, I think doctors now easily prescribe because it's the easy way out. But if we held them accountable on outcomes and started actually showing that and putting that online, wouldn't that make a difference? I think it would.
Amen. You mentioned John Kerry's sister, and it reminds me one of the trends in government is emergencies are identified that we're told are so threatening to this country that people can't be consulted on the policies we use to address them, whether it's COVID and climate, huge. And so the debate over whether climate's changing is measurable. The debate over why it's changing is much more subjective. Do you think climate change is driven by human activity?
I think climate change is real, but I think the conversation has been taken so out of whack that if you look at what Biden's done with all of these subsidies, when I was at the United Nations, there was the Paris Climate Agreement. And it sounds good, like, oh, everybody needs to go take care of the environment. But what I saw is they were holding countries to different standards. So Obama put this massive amount of regulations and all these abuses on our businesses and companies because he was trying to show that he was, that we really cared about the environment, when America's actually extremely good when it comes to the environment. We all want clean air, we all want clean water, and we work on it every day. If you really want to deal with the environment, if you really want, then do what I saw, go talk to China and India. Those are the biggest polluters, and no one is making them do anything about it. And not only that, while we had all the regulations on the US, China's was they would deal with it in 10 years. I can promise you 10 years never comes for China. That's the problem. That's why we got out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
Right, and you dealt with this question all the time at the UN, the question of how does the world respond to climate change. But there are really two questions. One is the climate changing? And I guess we can measure its temperature around the globe over a period of years. But the deeper question is why? We had glaciers 10,000 years ago. The climate has always changed dramatically since the formation of the Earth. So do you think humans are causing this change? And do you think that we can stop or slow it down? Like, is there actual evidence?
I mean, honestly, I don't know how much is being changed or not, as much as I know that putting electric vehicles on the road is not the answer to what you're doing. I saw as governor of South Carolina, we had companies come, and on their own, they would spend money to try and be more green. They wanted to be total good stewards on their own. Whatever they did, we didn't have to mandate that. We didn't have to require that. And I don't know how much of a difference that would have made at what they did anyway. I mean, I think right now the biggest issue I have is that you've got America right now going hat in hand to Saudi Arabia and getting dirty oil from Iran and Venezuela. We should be energy independent no matter what. I don't care what anybody says about the environment. This is a national security threat of not having energy independence. So people can say whatever they want to say about why the environment is the way it is. What I'm going to say is my job as president is to make sure that America is safe. And if America is safe, one of those factors is being energy independent. I saw at the United Nations, there were two things our enemies never wanted us to have. They never wanted us to be energy independent, and they never wanted us to have a strong military. We have to always have both of those things.
Well, speaking of energy in the military, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
I mean, I don't know.
I'm not claiming you did it. No. I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Do you know who did it?
Seems pretty obvious. It was backed by the Biden administration, I would say. I mean, I think all the evidence suggests that, but I wasn't there. But I mean, that seems like a huge step. This is the largest industrial sabotage in history, sent more carbon in the atmosphere than any act ever. And like, there's weirdly no curiosity about who did it. And I think that's strange. What do you think?
There's a lot of things that are strange with the Biden administration. This is the first one.
I guess what I'm really saying is if you were running against the Biden administration, to do something like that and shaft our closest allies in the world, which would be Western Europe, and deprive them of the energy they need to run their manufacturing sector and destroy their economy, which it is in the
I'm watching the comments on YouTube. Somebody said she's mom now. She's good mom material. I wish my mom was like her. You know, she's got a pretty good understanding of what's happening, far better than most women. We'll just say that. I think we all understand that women are not traditionally politically savvy. They have other things on their mind, and frankly, they shouldn't be involved in politics. Which, by the way, is one reason why she's not going to win. She's not even going to get a serious consideration. Um, and that's, I mean, the Instagram account I run, Beholden to Truth, I somewhat jokingly say that I head up the patriarchal Christian liftocracy. That's my movement. My small little band of 500 followers, that's what I would call us, the Christian patriarchal liftocracy. Because society does have to be a patriarchy, because human life is a patriarchy, because God created it that way. It's in Genesis, and it's all throughout the rest of the Bible that women should submit to their husbands. That if you want to go so far as Paul saying that women shouldn't even speak in church, that if they have questions about what's going on, they should wait and talk to their husband about it at home. Women shouldn't be in the workplace. They shouldn't be at natural competition for men and men's roles, such as being political leaders, such as being leaders of business and the economy. So a woman president just doesn't even make sense. But I know there's a lot of people that like really triggers. Like, what do you mean a woman can't go into the workplace and a woman, it can't make sense for a woman to be president? There's other countries who have women prime ministers and presidents. Look at them. Seriously, look at every other country that has a woman leading it and say, very simple question, would you prefer to live there than here? Okay, thanks. Thanks. Once you find one nation run by a woman that you would rather live in than America, you have an argument. Hasn't happened, not going to happen. Um, so anyway, she did pretty good with the climate change thing. I'm actually kind of surprised to hear that brought up because for conservative voters, we all kind of get that that's a sham, that that's a cash grab, that climate change is being used for several purposes. One of them is a cash grab, but it's more important to understand that it's not just about making money via a fake crisis. It's also about leveraging the power and authority you will get over people if they believe that climate change is real. You can then roll out the digital grid of controlling everybody's purchases with a CBDC, central bank digital currency. And you can use digital passports to control people's travel. You can use electronic cars to restrict people's travel. You can change people's consumerism habits to only buy goods that you have approved that they buy. You know, it's not like cash where you can just take your money wherever you want and spend it on whatever you want. Once all currency is unified under a digital currency that's controlled by the government, they can say, oh, well, creating beef and chicken and all these animal products, that causes too much CO2 emissions. So we're not going to say you can't do that anymore, but nobody is allowed to buy more than 5 pounds of meat per week or per month or whatever the quota is. And when you go to Walmart or whatever supermarket, you try to ring up that stuff because you have a digital ID that the bank has full access and transparency into. They'll say, sorry, I see that you're trying to buy some ground beef, but you already bought this much this month and we can't let you buy any more. Put it back. And there's going to be some little Nazi sitting. I use that term kind of jokingly because you know what we think about Nazis around here, but some kind of authoritarian um, enforcer at the checkout line is going to say, sorry, ma'am, can't let you buy that ground beef. Government says so. That's our future if you actually believe in climate change. And the same is true with every other aspect of your life. How many miles you drive your car, how many hours of the day you run your air conditioning, how much hot water you use. As soon as you exhaust your limit, boom, they tap into your currency and say, hey, we're not freezing your entire bank account. We're not taking away your money, but we're just telling you you can't spend your money on these things. So that's tied up within the climate change agenda. They want the cash grab opportunity of making money off of all these green stocks that they know their paid for politicians will give government kickbacks for. So it's like there's no way for these companies to fail because the government's going to fund these companies. So everybody gets in on the early ground level of these stocks. They make a bunch of money, and it helps them accumulate the power they want to control social behavior. So I didn't even write down climate change, but I guess I'll write down that in terms of, is that even important? Climate change. That's tied into the globalism thing. That's one of the World Economic Forum's big selling points, is that Agenda 2030 is that all these countries throughout the world have to be carbon neutral by 2030. And I explained how they want to be able to do so by basically restricting all these various parts of your life: the hot water you use, the electricity you use, the gas you use, the products you buy, all that. All right, let's jump back in. Nikki Haley. She's not doing bad. She's doing better than the other three by far. But Tucker hasn't asked her really any difficult questions. It's a little bit of an intelligence test to say point blank, do you believe that man-made climate change is real? Yes, the Earth is always changing. It's in a state of change now. But do you believe that's because we're doing this industrialization with all the carbon emissions and whatnot? He said very pointedly about the gas, the Nord Stream 2 attack, and how that spewed all this carbon into the atmosphere more than whatever other measurable amount, where it's very clear that if the climate was a serious interest of the government and of the most powerful people in the world, which they tell you it is, that's who's telling you how important it is. It's all the powerful people. At the ground level, none of us give a shit. There might be sheep who have been told by these powerful people that this is an urgent crisis. But other than that, the people that are really trying to make this happen are the people who have some kind of financial incentive to do so, or some kind of power incentive to do so. All right, here we go. Let's keep rolling. Got about half of this monster left. We'll probably stream for about another hour and a half, and then I'll move on to eating some dinner. We got to see Ron DeSantis' interview. That's going to be good. All right, so I got to stop talking. We got to keep watching.
The process of doing, like, that's a major sin to have done something like that. You just betrayed our allies, and no one on the right is accusing the Bidens of what they clearly did. So I don't know why. Well,
no one is accusing the Bidens aren't being accountable on anything. I mean, you look at the cocaine that was just found in there. I mean, that's a whole nother issue.
Whose was that?
So let me tell you this. No.
Oh, go ahead. No one's watching. Just what do you think?
No, this is really important, because I have been into that area of the White House. This is not,
it's party time,
as much as they want to say, and don't forget the pot that they just said was found there last year, right? So everything that they're saying is that hundreds of people went through this area. No, I've been to that area. It is the most secure area anywhere, because this is where I, on the National Security Council, with other members of national security, met with the president. You discussed the most secure things. I know the area where the locker is. People don't just go in and out of there. It is either the president, the vice president, cabinet members, or deputy directors. Nobody else is going in there. There is some staff, but it's immediate to, I couldn't take any staff but my deputy. The president would take his chief of staff, very limited. So for them to say they don't know who this was, don't tell me there's no cameras in there. There are absolutely cameras in there. So I will tell you, I strongly believe this is a cover-up for either Hunter or someone very close to the president, and they don't want to say who it is. But the problem I have is now your answer is, oh, this isn't a big deal because, by the way, there was marijuana twice last year. Why didn't you do anything about that? Like, who has time to go into the national security skiff, open the locker, and put drugs inside? Like, that's a bigger problem, because if you've got somebody doing cocaine deciding on national security, that's what I'm worried about.
Well, and it shows, I would say.
I totally agree.
So that, I mean, I mean, we seem to be closer to nuclear war than any time in my life.
Add some Coke to it.
So,
You
like,
don't know what's
how
gonna happen.
could... I guess I'm a little bit confused as to how, in the face of that, the sort of
I gotta say something. That's why I paused it. Because this is great. I'm glad Tucker and her talking about this openly and not trying to like skirt around it. And that he flat out said, probably Hunter's cocaine. Why do we say that? Because Hunter films himself doing cocaine all the time. It's like it's not a brain twister to figure out the Occam's razor of what's going on with the drugs in the White House. And it's probably not just Hunter who is enjoying them. But something hit me, and it honestly felt like a sinking feeling in my stomach. Because I'm sitting here laughing about this. If you guys are watching, you're sitting here laughing about this. Tucker and Nikki are sitting here laughing about how funny it is that there's cocaine and weed in the White House. What do other countries think when they're watching this? Seriously. What does a actual conservative, accountable to God country think of when they're watching the United States of America's top presidential candidates talking about what's going on in the White House? And they're talking about how the president's son is probably the person responsible for having cocaine in the White House and that people are smoking pot in there. And look, I'm not going to come down hard on the pot thing because I know that's legal in many states, including recreational use. I lived in Oregon for 7 years. I smoked pot. Hey, I'm not trying to hide anything, but I'm saying if it becomes a pattern where multiple types of drugs, especially drugs that are actually still illegal, nobody legalized cocaine, nobody legalized any hard drugs except not in the White House. They did legalize or decriminalize hard drugs in Portland and places like Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles. And you've seen what's happened to those cities. That's actually why you see the acute spike in homelessness, mental illness, as they say. Yeah, it's not exactly mental illness when we know it's drugs causing these symptoms. It's not a phantom demonic possession. It's these people are using hardcore drugs. Okay, they're spending their money on hardcore drugs. The usage of the hardcore drugs prohibits them from being able to go to work and keep a job. The wasted money and the missing of the job makes it so that they lose their home. And it's just a vicious cycle. These things play into each other. So you decriminalize drugs, that's a direct correlation to the increase in homelessness. The homelessness then directly correlates to a higher crime level, because what do you do when you're homeless and you don't know if you're going to have another meal? You steal it. You hold up somebody, you assault somebody at an ATM, you snatch somebody's purse, you break into a car. All these things stem from saying, hey, it's not a big deal. Everybody can do whatever drugs they want, whenever they want, wherever they want. We're going to stop enforcing laws. I watched that happen in real time at Portland. I said I was there when they legalized weed. I was there when they took it even further and legalized all drugs. And then I was there to watch the downfall of the drug addiction, which turned into homelessness, which turned into crime. This is just how it goes. It's a linear equation. Anyway, back in to the Nikki Haley interview.
Unending litany of failures from the party in charge, there could be like any contest this year at all, no matter who the nominee is. And yet, Democrats seem durably popular. I mean, you'd think they'd just generically be at about 10. Because, like, what have they done for you? Nothing. You know, they scream at you all the time, call you names, and make you poorer. So, like, what is that? I mean, does the Republican Party, it does seem like it should be doing better than it is, without blaming anyone in specifically.
No, but look, I've always spoken hard truths, and I think it's really important. We are $32 trillion in debt. We are having to borrow money just to make our interest payments. China owns some of that debt. It would be easy for me to tell you, oh, Biden and the Democrats did that. Our Republicans did that to us too. You go back and you look at that $4 trillion stimulus bill that was passed with no accountability whatsoever, expanded welfare that has now left us with 90 million Americans on Medicaid, 42 million Americans on food stamps. And did Republicans try and make that right? Nope. They doubled down and opened up earmarks for the first time in 10 years, pushing through 7,000 of them in December. Want to know how they spent your money? $30 million on an honors college in Vermont, $10 million to tear down a hotel in Alaska, $7.5 million on a courthouse in Colorado. And the list goes on, all while 1 in 6 American families can't pay their utility bill. 60% of Americans are in credit card debt. Social Security will go bankrupt in 10 years. Medicare will go bankrupt in 8. So we've got a spending problem in Congress. There are no saints in Congress right now. They love to spend our money, and it is high time we deal with that. And the way we deal with that when it comes to the economy is we should claw back the $500 billion of unspent COVID dollars that's still out there. Instead of 87,000 IRS agents going after middle America, let's go after the hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID fraud that exist. If 8% of our budget is interest, quit borrowing, cut up the credit cards. You have to balance a budget every day. I had to balance a budget as governor. The accountant in me says, stop the spending, stop the earmarks, stop the borrowing, and I will veto any spending bill that doesn't take us back to pre-COVID levels.
So, thank you for that. So, finally, just as kind of a window into what you like and what you don't like, you've attacked the Congress. I don't think there's anyone would disagree with what you said.
You got to ask her about the war. That's what people care about, because she actually did really well with all those questions. But we have to stop government spending. Yeah, obviously. Climate change, we shouldn't be going head over heels for that. Yeah, obviously. Election fraud, we got to fix that. Yeah, obviously. What about Ukraine? What about the $100 billion we've given to Ukraine? Because the rumor is that you're okay with that and that you're going to continue to give them more money. So let's hear it. Let's see if Tucker puts her on the spot and demands an answer. I'm actually going to be really, really suspicious if he doesn't.
But are there individual members in the House or Senate, you must know most of them, who you admire and you think are doing a good job?
No, of course. I mean, I think Iowa, you've got a fantastic delegation. I mean, you look at...
That's just such a stupid softball question. Like, hey, who do you want to give a blowjob to? Who do you want to give a political blowjob to real quick? Because you know it will be beneficial for you. That they'll appreciate that. They'll say something good about you in their next speech. When it comes to you trying to get something passed, maybe they'll remember how positive you were about that. Like, Tucker, why are you asking this? When there are so much more important questions out there, she didn't discuss the demographic change. That's what I really care about. She hasn't discussed the Ukraine situation, also what we care about. So, well, I almost want to fast forward through this answer because it's like, seriously, who cares? There's no name she could throw out there. Oh, I think Donald Trump, or I mean, it literally doesn't matter what she says, but okay. Anyway, here we go. Let's fast forward.
You know, what Joni Ernst does, or Grassley does, or Ashley Henson, or Marionette Miller-Meeks. By the way, Brenna Bird is fantastic. But you know, there are lots of...
So Iowa leads the way, really.
No. It's not that. We have certain people. This is not about having good people. This is about having a good conservative agenda so that all of a sudden government understands the value of a dollar. They've lost the value of a dollar. We've seen that. And so, yes, you can have good people, but if the good people aren't stopping the spending, then we've got to make sure from the top we say, we're done. No more. You're not going to do this anymore.
So, last question, which I can't resist. If they're still classifying the JFK assassination docs 60 years later, they're just mocking us, aren't they?
It's the same thing with the UFOs. They're totally making everybody want to know what happened. You just need to release all of that. Release it all. Let us see it. There's no reason to hold on to that now. Release it now.
Well, good for you. Well, thank you. You won me on that one. Nikki Haley.
Thank you so much.
Great to see you.
You know, I want to leave you with this. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate that, but I want to leave you with this. Someone asked me why I was running. And I said, you know, my parents came here 50 years ago to an America that was strong and proud and full of opportunities. I want them to know that country again. My husband is deployed. I want him and his military brothers and sisters to know their sacrifice matters, that we do love our country. My daughter, I'm doing this for her because she and her husband just got married, and I saw how hard it was for them to buy a home. And my son is a senior in college, and I've watched him write papers of things he doesn't believe in just to get an A. That's not us. That's not America. We deserve better. 78% of Americans right now don't think their kids are going to live as good of a life as we did. We can't be okay with that. I'm not okay with that. We've got a country to save. Go to NikkiHaley.com if you want to join me, and I promise you our best days are to come. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that.
Appreciate
That was
you.
great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so
I
much.
want to just get a quick reaction here. There were really many things here that puzzled me. One of them, Carrie and I were just talking about. My son, my daughter, if you are lying to people that you are paying,
Yeah.
when do you not lie?
On a term paper.
On a term paper.
To get an A.
Yeah. I found some interesting things. She, at the end, and Steve, I want to ask you, because, again, this is your kingdom. She said some things that did connect with me about spending, about the Republicans, but it didn't seem to go over well. Is it because she wasn't the one to deliver it, or does this room disagree with her?
I think she's the only candidate we've seen so far who's helped themselves because they
Yes.
didn't destroy themselves.
Right.
Okay. But I'm stunned that Tucker did not ask a foreign policy question of the former
Yes.
head of the United Nations.
Yes.
And I can only come to two conclusions. One, he thought maybe the first half of this event was too Ukraine-centric and they had to broaden the discussion. Two, he thinks she's an irrelevant candidate or a little bit of both. So I was a little bit surprised that those foreign policy issues never came up. But I think you also saw that just in terms of political talent, we forget sometimes politics is a vocation. It's not just a belief. It's not just a manifestation of your belief system. You got to be good at the job. What you saw up there is a much savvier politician than what you saw from Mike Pence and from Asa Hutchinson. She knew what she was walking into. She was prepared. She understood how to turn phrases and turn the crowd more to her favor and to disarm Tucker a little bit. I just think you saw more political talent up there than what you saw this morning.
Yeah.
I felt like we were seeing somebody who was running a 2012 race.
That too.
Yes.
And I'm looking at her. When he came out and said what he said about 81 million votes,
Yeah.
I was waiting for her to be more honest. I mean,
How would you have answered that?
Well, I mean, I have a song, right now. We know 81 million votes didn't happen. And they've asked us to take our intelligence and check it.
No, so wait,
To
but
believe this. So how would I?
I want you to answer that. If you were the candidate and I was Tucker and I said to you, 81 million.
Well,
what happened?
You know how I'm going to answer it. I'm going to say, of course it didn't happen. Joe Biden didn't get anything close to that. President Trump won more votes than any sitting president in history. And they rigged this election to put Joe Biden in the White House. Period. Glenn, you don't lose 17 out of 18 bellwethers and win the most votes in the history of our country. You just don't do it.
Correct.
You don't only win 16% of counties and win the most votes of anybody.
Correct.
So then let me ask you again, if you were the candidate. So what are we doing here? How do we fix this? Because all of this doesn't matter if we can't count on the vote being accurate.
Well, if you want me to answer honestly, we could have fixed that on January 6th.
Arrest Katie Hobbs would be my
We could
answer.
have fixed that on January 6th when there were major problems and a million people were standing there protesting and saying, help us. Congress, give us relief. Send these questionable numbers back to our states. Please let us look through this. And we didn't do the right thing. Our nation failed that day. And that's why I'm fighting. And that's why our election, our victory was stolen from us. And sadly, I think that many of the people who are showing up and are going to be talking to Tucker don't want to talk about election corruption. But I will tell you, I've spoken to many people when I was standing out here who are attendees here. And they're telling me, thank you for fighting. We've got to sort these elections
It is
out.
either the first, second, or third question that I've been asked by almost everybody I've talked to here. And that is, does any of this matter anyway? Are we going to have a secure election? And, I was just talking to one of the other candidates, and I said, one question that they won't answer in Congress is, What does that executive order do? One of the first ones Biden put in was.
All right, so some good commentary there by Glenn Beck and Kerry Lake, and I don't know the gentleman's name on the right, but he had some good points as well. The fundamental question here, the existential question to our entire country, to our democracy, to America is, do our elections even fucking matter at this point? Because if we're all willing to openly say the last one was just stolen, it's like, okay, well, then why are we doing this? Why are we hosting a primary debate or primary interviews, town halls? Why are we going through this whole circus charade if we already know that no matter what candidate we get up there, whether it's Trump or one of these people, they're just going to do the same thing again? And so there's a lot of people who say that that is the number one issue that should be addressed in every single political discussion with the presidential candidates is, before we talk about anything, the Ukrainian war, the economy, the demographic change that Josh keeps talking about, before we talk about any of that, if we can't even trust the election system to get people voted in by the people of the United States to change the way the U.S. needs to go based on the people's input, if we can't trust that that's how it's working, it doesn't matter what all these other policies are or positions are. So, he's right. You got to hit that. And I think she addressed that question far better than any of the other people who have been on stage thus far. I was just thinking about Carrie Lake. I'm glad to see they have her up here doing, the panelist stuff. What I'm really wondering is why she's not up there as a presidential candidate, not because she would actually win, not because I want her to be a candidate, but in terms of the quality of the individual and the things that they're talking about, election fraud specifically, there are things that I disagree with Carrie about, but she would at least be the primary person talking about that with an open stance that the election was stolen. And that's where we start building our campaign around. And so what I think is happening, and the reason she isn't running instead of somebody like Nikki Haley, for example, is that she's going to be tapped to be somebody else's vice president, whether that's Ron DeSantis or Trump. Somebody is going to ask her to run with them, and that's going to bring in a lot of voters for that person, I think. But not enough to pull votes away from Trump. So, like, for example, if the ticket is DeSantis and Carrie Lake, and then Trump with who knows for vice president, it doesn't matter. That combination of Carrie Lake and DeSantis, I don't think that's going to be powerful enough to take over Trump's popularity and Trump's uniqueness as an individual. But let's jump ahead to Vivek Ramaswamy's interview with Tucker. I think that actually was listed down here at 6:50 into this. All right, let's cue it up.
As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, true. So much. I know.
Is that on? I love it. So Vivek is the only person running, I think, who hasn't practiced politics for a living. Correct?
Yeah, I'm not a practitioner.
No, you're not. You're not a practitioner. So it's interesting. So let me just start with a very quick overview. You've been traveling around the country for the past, 3 months, 4 months?
Yeah, 4 months.
How do you think the country's doing?
I think the country is doing poorly, is the answer. I think that we have a void in our country. I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. And I see people my age in particular across this country who are not doing well because we're starved for purpose and meaning. The people are looking to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and yet we've lost the things that used to ground us. Faith, patriotism, hard work, family. These things are gone, and so we're lost in the wilderness, and then we latch on to whatever the other side serves up for us. We could wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, whatever it is. These are symptoms, drug addiction, depression, suicide, you name it. These are symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning in our country. But Tucker, I think the good news in that is I think our country's not doing well, but I think that this is also.
So I think he got off to a great start. And by the way, I think he's probably the best of these 5 we've seen so far. Having listened to his commentary before, there's things that I staunchly disagree with, and no, he has no likelihood of actually winning the presidency. But that being said, he said exactly what I said before on this stream. I said that the depression, the self-harm, the homelessness, the drug addiction, the suicide, all of that stuff, those are symptoms not of mental illness, but of spiritual illness, as he called it, purpose, some kind of higher calling. And we said that previously in America, we were Christian and we valued family. Those two things are no longer true. We abort our children. Our divorce rate is more than 50%. We don't even treat marriage as a serious institution in the fact that we allow homosexuals to marry each other. So I'm pleased to hear him actually getting to the root situation, the root illness in America. It is a spiritual matter. Let's see what else he adds on top of that commentary.
Our opportunity as a movement to level up and fill that void, that vacuum, with our own vision. Individual, family, nation, God. When I talk to young people about this, they're more interested in that than they are in race, gender, sexuality, and climate. And so now we got to start running to something as Americans, and if we do, I'm confident that our country will be doing well again. That's where I'm at.
Is it my imagination, or are people who weren't raised in traditional religious households, who haven't spent a lot of time thinking about theology, all of a sudden talking about God a lot? Do you notice that?
I do notice that, actually, and I think this is a good sign because there's an old expression, right? If there's a hole the size of God in your heart and God does not fill it, something else will instead. That's what's happened in the last decade in our country. Something else, some secular religion has filled that void. But it hasn't really satisfied our moral hunger, right? And so that's kind of, that effect is fading, and I think people are hungry to turn back to the real thing. The conversation's coming up, but they say it with a kind of prudishness.
Yes.
Right? God is a 4-letter word. It's sort of a thing you have to tiptoe around. And I think that right now, family's the same way. The nuclear family makes some people uncomfortable when I say it, but actually this is the best known form of governance to mankind. And so if we start talking more about, hey, that's what we're running to. That's actually what we stand for. Yes, we are one nation. I'm a citizen of this nation, not.
All right, I'm watching these comments on YouTube, and they're saying exactly what I'm thinking. A lot of people are giving him praise, and he actually sounds great. He's doing really, really good. He's talking about how God shouldn't be a controversial subject. The problem is he's using that 3-letter word God, and he's not using the words Jesus Christ. And based on what I'm seeing in chat, it's probably because he's not a Christian. So I don't know what his theological belief is. Maybe he's Buddhist, maybe he's Muslim. I don't think he's Jewish. But this is critical for everybody to understand, because there's a lot of people who will concede ground right here and say, well, it's good that he's at least directing people towards acknowledging that they have to have God in their life and they have to have a spiritual life. And perhaps if you open up that vision for people, people can then work through which religion works best for them, and hopefully they come to the conclusion that Christianity is the right one. But you can't leave it ambiguous. And the only reason he's doing that is because he's not Christian, or if he was Christian and he still isn't specifically saying Christ is king, people need to come to Jesus, it's because he's afraid he's going to lose voters. We all know that that's true. Not even Donald Trump. Nobody, no politician will get up there and say, this country needs Jesus Christ. We need people who love and follow Jesus Christ. We need our citizens that way, and we need our leaders to be that way. Like I'll say it a million times on my stream. That's what the vision from the top down has to be. Because if you're talking about God or gods and not specifying Jesus Christ, you're leaving the door open that it's okay for any other spirituality other than Jesus Christ, for our leaders and for the average people, for the sheep, for the flock of sheep that Jesus is the shepherd of. You're saying it's okay if they come to some kind of spiritual conclusion that is not Jesus Christ. And it's not okay. Not only will they damn themselves to eternal hellfire, but they will also destroy society because their moral code will be drawn from some other religion, which is by default a false religion. Because what did Jesus say? I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. That is an exclusionary statement. It's in the New Testament. Those are Jesus Christ's words. They're not confusing. They're not in gray. There's no debating it. If you're a Christian, there is only one God. Jesus Christ is God. And so to say that we need God in our lives, and maybe you can fill that God void up with being Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever. No, that's Lucifer parading as an angel of light. So I'm coming down hard on the guy, but that's because I'm starting to suspect, based on chat and based on his obfuscation of when you use that word God, what are you actually saying? He's technically correct in everything that he's saying, but he's not specifying that God is Jesus Christ, and that's like kind of the most important thing. I know it might be political suicide, but somebody at the national level has to say it.
Not some nebulous global citizen somewhere else, that it is one nation under God. Yes, it is a nation that is stronger when we ground ourselves in the unit of the family. Then I noticed something happens, especially for younger people across the country, Tucker, is they're more open to that message than they thought, but they need someone to serve it up to them.
Chat is saying Vivek is Hindu. So I don't know if that's true or not. Somebody can go and verify that. But I mean, come on, guys, look at him. That's probably true. I'm not trying to stereotype, not trying to religiously profile, but I have a feeling Vivek Shalawarmi or whatever, Vivek Ramaswamy is when he talks about God, he's probably talking about it from the Hindu perspective.
And I think I'm the first non-politician, but I'm also a younger person in this race. I don't have a ton of experience running governments before. But I think in reaching younger people, that's something I feel called to do in this race, and it's why we're traveling college campuses across this country. And I am optimistic about what I see.
Well, since you are a younger person and spend time with them, we saw yesterday that a group of reservists has been called up to Europe, apparently, to prepare for war with Russia. Of people in the age cohort who might plausibly be called up to do that, what's the response?
I think there is no basis for us to send our young men and women, our sons and daughters, people my age or any age, to go defend somebody else's border halfway around the world when we should be using our own military to secure our own border in this country. And I will not apologize for that. We have to put the interests of this country first. And one of the things that does frustrate me, Tucker, is that this is one issue where I so love many of the other people who are running for this nomination for president. I think most of us, and the entire field I speak for, are in this for the right reasons. We are people who care about our country and want to deliver our country to a better place. But on this issue, nearly our entire field is indistinguishable in practice from where Biden is on this, which is in an undefined, ill-defined way pouring more money into a war that I think is destined to become Vietnam or Iraq all over again. And if you don't learn from the lessons of the past, you're going to be making the same mistakes on an even larger scale going forward. We have to end this war. We can end this war and start prioritizing the interests of actual U.S. citizens here at home.
So I think Judging by the response you just got, I think a chunk of, I don't know what percentage, but a lot of Republican primary voters agree with you. Not all, but a lot. I don't think any Republican donors agree with you.
I think that's accurate. And I've lost, to be really honest with you, I've lost many large donors or prospective donors over this issue. And it puzzles me because I think the tempting thing to say is to have some conspiratorial explanation that they have money at stake in government contractors, Raytheon, or whatever. I don't think that's true, actually. I think there's something else going on in the psychology of an establishment in both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party that is reluctant to the idea that we somehow can't be the ones fighting the war that's the popular war of the day, the politically correct war. I think there's no such thing as a politically correct war. And so what I ask is, how are we actually going to end this conflict in a way that advances U.S. interests? And the thing that puzzles me, Tucker, is nobody in either party is talking about this right now. The Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat that the U.S. actually faces today. And we are pushing Russia closer into China's arms by actually continuing to arm Ukraine. So what I've said is that I would negotiate a deal that ends the Ukraine war, frees the current lines of control. Yes, that means giving part of the Donbas region to Russia. I would make a hard commitment that NATO never admits Ukraine to NATO. And those seem like unspeakable words in certainly the Republican donor class. But we get something greater in return, which is that Putin, in that case, would have to exit his military partnership with China and remove nuclear weapons from Kaliningrad, which border Poland, and get the Russian military out of Cuba and Venezuela and the West. And this is a deal that Putin should do because he ends up winning. He gets things that he doesn't have today. But it secures American interests, too. And I do think in a weird way, it does take an outsider to get that job done. Because if you want someone to fix a problem, you don't turn over the keys to somebody who actually broke the thing in the first place. If you want to fix it, maybe have somebody who didn't break it in the first place. And that's part of why I'm in this race as an outsider.
Okay, well, since you're getting radical now, let's go through a list of all the other things you're not allowed to say. So you've just said, you know, you're not attacking anybody, but this doesn't seem to be helping us. In fact, it seems to be creating an alliance that we can't beat, and really, it's pretty scary. So let's just go through the list. Another thing you can't say is that maybe January 6th, while appalling on one level, maybe it was not an insurrection.
So let me talk about, I haven't talked about this much in the campaign. I'll be very honest with you. You want to know what caused January 6th? There's such a temptation to say that there's one man whose name is unspeakable. We can't.
No, first of all, it's QAnon.
It's QAnon. It's QAnon. You want to know what caused January 6th? Is pervasive censorship in this country in the lead up to January 6th. You tell people in this country they cannot speak, that is when they scream. You tell people they cannot scream, that is when they tear things down. And so the reality is, we were told that you could not question where the virus came from when we all knew it came from a lab in Wuhan, which now they admit. We were told that you could not send a private message to someone on the eve of an election that Hunter Biden's laptop story was actually a true story worth considering before an election. You were systematically suppressed. So think about this. You told you had to be locked down, had to take a vaccine that was mandated and forced down your throat, stay locked down in your home while Antifa and BLM roam and burn the streets of this country. So that's the lead up of one full year of telling people you have to shut up, sit down, and do as you're told. And then you tell them, okay, there's an election where you didn't get the information that you needed, such as the Hunter Biden laptop story being real and suppressed. That's what caused January 6th, is a cycle of censorship in this country. And until we look ourselves in the mirror and admit truth on that, we will not move forward as a country. And I think that's the real cause. And we're not, and I'm sorry to say this, Tucker, but I think until we reckon with that reality, I worry that is the beginning of, it's a friendly parley compared to what's to come, unless we step up and speak truth, restore integrity, and actually lead us to who we are as a people, rather than sweeping the truth under the rug.
Yeah, that was the highlight of the night so far. The chat's going crazy. Everybody likes that. So based, blah, blah, blah. 100% preach, nailing it. Let's go, Vivek. But here's the thing: is he's 100% correct. 100% correct. And unfortunately, the people who are older than him that are trying to run for president, including Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, the candidates we watched earlier, Mike Pence, he doesn't have any grasp of internet censorship and the implications of internet censorship. It takes somebody from the millennial and below age demographic to come in and say one of the ways that they actually really, really fucked up the election was by weaponizing the government to tell social media to censor certain posts that would negatively impact the Democrat Party or the Democrat candidate in Joe Biden and would actively shield them from criticism. That swayed the election alone. Our own government is, what is the right word? It's a helper in a crime. You know what I'm talking about? Complicit. Our own government is complicit in election interference just based on the censorship that happened alone. And he provided all the supporting arguments for the suppression of people's dissatisfaction around COVID, that we had a powder keg situation and you had an election that was highly suspicious. People tried to say something about it. You wouldn't let them say something about it. I said this in my earlier podcast that January 6th was an election integrity protest. It wasn't an insurrection attempt to take over the government. Obviously, there may have been some people there who talked about how that could happen. You can't help rogue actors. You can't help rogue actors who are influenced by federal operatives like Ray Epps and the others that we know were present in the crowd per the FBI's own admission. So that was the best, strongest point of the night, in my opinion, so far. Pretty impressed. Let's see what else they discuss.
How can you, just as a philosophical question, a lot of the people who are pushing censorship, in fact, I would say almost all of them in both parties, particularly the Democratic Party, claim they're doing so in order to protect democracy. But how can you have a democracy with censorship?
So you want to know the best measure of the health of a democracy? We're a constitutional republic, but I'll use lowercase d democracy as a fill-in, right? Couldn't resist.
People always applaud at that. I love that.
It's just the truth, though, right?
No, it is
We're a
true.
republic.
But the civics majors love it.
That's great. But the best measure of the health of our American democracy, our constitutional republic, is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. That's the metric. It's not the number of ballots cast every November. That's just going through the motions. It is not some other metric of what the media says on a given day. It is the percentage of people who will say in public what they're willing to say behind closed doors. There's no doubt we're doing poorly. The culture is censorious enough. Now, if you say the government on top of that is using social media companies to do through the back door what government could not censor through the front door under the Constitution, that creates the real threat to lowercase d democracy. My litmus test is if Vladimir Putin was doing it and we would call it a threat to democracy, it's a threat to democracy when we do it on this side of the Atlantic as well. Okay, that's a good way of not pointing the finger at somebody else, but looking ourselves in the mirror and asking ourselves who we really are. And this is personal for me. I'm a Republican candidate for U.S. president. It feels still new to say that. Not a politician by nature, but I bring that fact up, now as of very recently, certainly polling reasonably well in the recent polls. And I bring that up because against that backdrop, Microsoft owned LinkedIn censored my social media account. They locked my account, said I can't get in to make statements that are factually grounded statements about climate change, about Biden's relationship with China, about the ESG movement's perpetuation of a climate cult in this country, all grounded in fact, saying that it violates their policies for hate speech, misinformation. And I'm not making this one up. They said violence in the email. And so in my case, look, I was able to publicize that. They were then claimed it was an error, restored the account, typical operating procedure. But it's that culture of censorship in our country that I think we also, I'm trying to do my part, where I was in Ottumwa, eastern Iowa, earlier this week. Smaller event than this, but we're on the stage talking. Somebody walks in. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. At first I thought, usually if they're screaming, sometimes they're in favor of what you're saying, so I said, thank you. But I realized that actually, no, she...
When she bit you, you realized?
she came... So she was out of control, okay?
Yeah. I know her. Yeah. I ran into her at Dulles Airport last week. Yeah.
We've all seen a version of her, but the truth is, so security was escorting her out, and it felt wrong to me, right? Because she came here to make a point. She was totally wild in the way she was making it, but I'm watching her walk out the door. She's at the back of the room now, and I said, this doesn't feel right. Right, because as I said earlier, you tell people they can't speak, that's when they scream. You tell people they can't scream, and she was screaming. That's when they're going to go tear something down. So I said, no, bring her back. We gave her the mic. I said, I promised. You ask your question, but I promise I get to answer it in return. She agrees to that. It turns out she's a pro-choice advocate, a my body, my choice person. I was going to the state legislature on Tuesday morning. I think she must have known that. Came to this event to protest my being there. But I give her the mic. She's just talking for, 3, 4, 5 minutes. But by the end of it, it actually turns out, the story comes out that she's a single mother who did bring her daughter into the world. And the things she was saying were things like, my daughter is successful. I don't want you to look down on me. And I thought it was beautiful that the more she started talking, the more she started making our very point of why we believe in protecting life. And so I said, disagreements aside, you are a mother. We celebrate that. The audience applauded. It's why I love Iowans.
Wow.
She broke down in tears and left. And so I'm moved by what is possible in our country. Our country is broken. We are spiritually broken. We have a spiritual void in this country. It is our job to step up and fill that void by practicing what we preach as conservatives. And so I'm hoping we're doing that. I love doing that in Iowa. It's been something that's really lifted me up in a way that was never an experience I had as a CEO or in business. I've never had these experiences as we've had in the last few months. And honestly, as broken as our country is, it leaves me optimistic about where we're headed.
And you can listen to people. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not going to hurt you.
So what? Okay, so it's so interesting. So you, and I think the intro of you described some of it, but you're coming from a completely different world. It's not like you were mayor, state legislator. You're coming from business and technology and biotech. So what have you learned? How have your views changed since you immersed yourself in crowds of voters and started listening to people?
Yeah, so I think my views have changed in part by my belief that we're not as divided as they make it out to be, right? Because many CEOs in this country are frightened, right, of speaking their mind openly. It actually stops, many of them will say, well, stops them from being donors to me, to maybe other causes. They're deathly scared because they believe that we're a nation at our breaking point. And in some ways, we are, because we let it get there. But one of the things I've been convinced of, I've changed my mind on, is that I don't think we're nearly as divided as we're taught to believe. But I went to the south side of Chicago. It's one of the places it's not really where the political advisors would tell you to go if you're in a Republican primary. I went to Kensington and downtown in the inner city of Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And I'll tell you, the people in those rooms, especially on the south side of Chicago, where they're converting South Shore High School into an encampment for migrants who they're spending $7,000 per person per month on, this is the supposedly far left, nearly entirely black, Democratic voting bloc. And I have never heard more eloquent cases for securing the border and actually prioritizing the interests of Americans than I heard in that room.
What did they say?
They said, what about us?
Yeah.
Was actually the right way to say that. And it came out in many ways where, look, we are Christians. We believe in treating these people humanely. But it's not right that they're spending $7,000 a month and getting baby formula when I couldn't find baby formula a year ago. I can't buy sneakers for my kids. They're providing sneakers for those kids. How does that work? How is that advancing my interests? And actually, you just reminded me of this. Many of them were asking me, as though I was on the side of it, of why on earth we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. So it was interesting to me that the traditional partisan boundaries as drawn are really sort of retrofitted. We're sort of shoehorning an old structure. We're sort of shoehorning the modern truth into sort of an antiquated view where I don't think the dividing line in our country is between Republicans and Democrats right now. I think it is between those of us who are pro-American, who believe in the ideals of this country, who will not apologize for those ideals, who will stand up and sacrifice for those ideals, and those of us who are, and it exists in this country, I mean, the Vice President's a great embodiment of this, anti-American. Those who wish to apologize for a nation founded on our ideals. But if you divide it up that way, it is not 50-50 anymore. It's not even close. It's easily 80-20 in our favor, and half the 20 are people younger than me who never learned what those ideals were in the first place. We're going to bring them along too. And I think we have an opportunity to do in this country in 2024 what Ronald Reagan did in 1980. Deliver a landslide election, call the bluff on the division. Much of it is artificial. I fell for it, right? Even when I started this campaign, I'm running for a Republican candidate for U.S. president, I don't even talk about Republicans that much anymore. I try not to use the word. Not because it's a bad word, but because it doesn't mean anything. Right? If half the Republican, 3/4 of the Republican Party's got the same policy as Biden on the most important policy matter of our time, you know, and if much of the Democratic Party, or at least people on the south side of Chicago, believe in using the military on the southern border and putting the interests of Americans first, I'm not sure those labels are doing much for us now. And one of the things, I actually just got this stat yesterday from my campaign, 40% of the donors to our campaign are first-time ever donors to the Republican Party in any form ever, and the normal number is 2%. So I think this should actually give us hope for possibility if we're willing to take the shackles off a little bit, relax a little bit on thinking. Identity can be confining. Right? The left does this masterfully. You're black, therefore you can't achieve something. You're a woman, therefore you can't achieve something. Identity's confining. You can be imprisoned in the identities that you inherit. And I just want to be careful that we learn from the left, or learn including what not to do, to be confined and imprisoned by our own identity of what it means to be Republican. Let's just let that word go and instead ask the question of what it actually means to be an American today. That's the question of our time. And you ask people my age that question, you get like a deer in the headlights response. It's like, it's a blank stare initially. But on the other side of that is then an introspection to say, okay, there are certain ideals that we fought a revolution for in this country. Self-governance over aristocracy, sovereignty as a nation, free speech, meritocracy. That you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and contributions. That's what it means to be an American. That's what we're running to. And honest to God, Tucker, I think that if we do this right, if we actually prioritize our vision, what we stand for, I think it's going to be a landslide election for a, I'm not going to say Republican candidate, a pro-American candidate in this race.
It's just interesting because what you didn't mention, so I asked you, you've been traveling around the country. It sounds like you've really, I mean, you went to Kensington on the south side. You've really kind of been to the span of the country. I watch media coverage, and everything's about race. And America is divided by race. That's America's original sin. It's the thing that cleaves us as a country. You didn't mention that. No. So why do they keep telling me that?
They blow what I call woke smoke to deflect accountability for their own failure, actually. So what do you think affirmative action has done for black people in this country? Nothing. What do you think? It's been negative. It's created racism that otherwise would not have existed. I've seen it. I have hired black executives at companies I have founded on merit. I could care less for the skin color. And then behind closed doors, people will say, well, that person got their job because of race, because they're jealous because they weren't good enough to get the job. But that is sad. It's unfair to everyone involved. They'll blow woke smoke. They'll say math is racist. When in fact, you know, what might be wrong is not teaching kids in the inner city for a year under COVID lockdowns how to do math. And then they're using this to cover up for that failure. I personally think that's actually what's going on in the U.S. military, too. Right? People wonder about where's this wokeness in the military coming from. I mean, our military has been disastrous in defining its purpose, how we're actually using the resources of a military to fight wars that we haven't actually shown great value from in the last 25 years. So let's just talk about systemic racism and white rage instead. It's a deflection mechanism. Companies do it, the military does it, schools do it, teachers' unions do it. It's irrelevant, and in fact, what would they ever do without those poor black kids who they could hold out as the sacrificial lambs for their own failures. What we actually need to do is to level up and say, no. Regardless of the color of your skin, how are we going to be a country that ensures opportunity, black, white, man, woman, doesn't matter? You know, my parents came to this country with almost no money. I've gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies. And then people tell me, oh, that's because you had privilege. They tell me white privilege. It's sort of weird. It's sort of an interesting, it's kind of interesting, actually.
Do you tell them?
I say, take the blindfold off, and now you have your answer. But the interesting answer is, actually what I do tell him, Tucker, is that I did have privilege. I didn't grow up in money, but I had two parents in the house, a mother and a father, with a focus on education and a faith in God. And you know what? That is the ultimate privilege. That if I'm going to enjoy that, every kid in this country ought to enjoy it too.
Do you think, I just have to ask you this, do you, because you're not a political professional, do you think Biden's going to be the nominee?
So it depends on who the Republican nominee is. I'm running because at this point, actually, my heart says, I couldn't have told you this in February. I launched on your show, and honest to God, when I left, I had no idea how this thing was going to go. My gut instinct is that I will be the nominee and in a position to win this in a landslide versus Biden. And they will not let Biden run against me. So I believe that if I am the nominee, they will not let Biden run. It is why they're holding in the back pocket the documents case against Biden. It is why they're holding in the back pocket everything else that you're wondering why they're not charging or bringing now. It's not a Democrat or Republican thing. It's a managerial class, deep state bureaucratic class versus elected official puppets thing. And so they're not going to have to use that if it's Trump, because they think based on, you know, they don't analyze, they analogize. They say we did it. We can debate that, but we appear to have done it. You know, we appear to have done it, and so we'll do it again. So if it's Trump, they're going to run Biden. If it's me, there's no way they let Biden run. It's going to be a new puppet, Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama, you name it. It doesn't matter to me, though, because for me, whoever it is, I'm not running against anybody in this primary field. And I'm going to keep that philosophy in the general. I'm not running against whichever puppet they put up, Biden or somebody else. I'm running for our vision of what it means to be a citizen of this nation, the United States of America. I'm leading us to something, and nobody else is going to get in the way.
Thank you. Vivek, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tucker.
I gotta say, guys, that was really, really entertaining, engaging, encouraging. That's the word I was really searching for. There are reasons that I don't think he will win, but he was head and shoulders above, and head and shoulders is not even enough to describe how far above his political skills and his understanding of what's actually happening in this country, the racial issue actually being a very, very significant thing. He actually used the word white. He actually talked about the anti-whiteness being pushed, despite the fact that he's not even white. This is the thing. This is what people who are really awake and understand the implication of demographic change, who are not white, talk about. Myron, who is the host on Fresh and Fit, talk about Sneeko, who, you know, obviously is a well-known streamer. These are not white people, but they understand that if America loses its majority white population, that doesn't benefit the whole country. It doesn't. Everybody's living standards go down. We expose ourselves to unimaginable horrors of cartels taking over, of gangs taking over, you name it. Organized crime in a country that is not primarily white looks very different than a country that is primarily white. Obviously, we have some crime and corruption at the white collar level, including our government, including the Biden administration. I'm not saying that white people are somehow like never guilty of organized crime. But what I'm saying is at the lower and middle class level, where all of us exist, the prevalence of violent crime as a result of organized crime, we don't have to deal with that in European nations, nations of European descent. You don't have people being snatched off the streets and videotapes of blackmail and ransom going back and forth, all that stuff. So he was super articulate, and I really think he did a good job. Doubt he will win, but what I will say, I saw this comment a lot on the scrolling comments on YouTube, was that people think he would be a very good vice presidential candidate, perhaps supporting Donald Trump. He would bring in the diversity vote. We always got to pander to the diversity vote. And he's actually a way better choice than trying to bring in a woman vote vice president. And some people think that that's just what you have to do in this gynocracy that we live in, the feminist 3.0 world. You have to have a female running mate. I don't think that's true. I think he won with Mike Pence back in 2016. That's not ancient history. I think you can have a male vice president just fine. And the people who, the citizenry, the constituency who are going to vote conservative, they kind of get it. That woman leadership at the presidential or vice presidential level, it's irrelevant. It's not really a compelling, ooh, maybe I'll change my vote based on that. The only reason Trump would do that, or any political candidate would do that, would be to pander to Democrat voters and try to sway them as portraying ourselves as open-minded and progressive and whatnot. But the woman would actually have to have the merit in order for that to be believable. It can't be a Kamala Harris, and it can't be Sarah Palin. Could it be a Nikki Haley? Yeah. When you look, if you're saying it's based on merit and not gender, look at Nikki Haley's performance. Look at Vivek's performance. Night and day difference. Way different energy. Yeah, so Vivek has a pulse on what's actually going on. He knows about the circumstance of censorship and how that's swaying political elections, but it's also making individual lives miserable. He clearly said it was the root cause of January 6th. This political correctness world, which is just more terminology for forcing censorship on people, it doesn't play well for a society. It just can't be. So I was pretty happy with that one, you guys. Pretty happy with it. Let's do a couple minutes of commentary from Glenn Beck and Carrie Lake and the other guy and see what they say. I'm a genius, so I'm expecting them to agree with me, but we'll see. They're pretty smart. I'm expecting them to say that that was the best showing of the night. And once we hear their commentary, I'll wrap things up for the night. There's still the Ron DeSantis interview, but we're going to have to do that tomorrow because by the time we watch this and I do some last comments, I got to get dinner in me. I'm hungry. So let's see what the panel has to say about Vivek's performance.
There you have it, Vivek Ramaswamy in an impressive performance. An impressive performance, I think, from Vivek Ramaswamy. Look, he's really good at this. He's a good guest on shows. He's a good public speaker. He's smart. He's bold with his ideas. And I think if you haven't seen Vivek in a political setting yet, you probably walk away from that pretty darn impressed. I mean, especially, looking at the rest of the field that we've seen today, I think he was the most impressive that we've seen so far, in my opinion. And, I mean, he hit some really important themes about going to something as opposed to just going against something. And I think his idea, I think that when he hit the idea of privilege, I thought it was really, really a powerful part of his presentation there. The idea that privilege does not come in the form of skin color, does not come in the form of money. It comes in the form of two parents who have faith in God. I thought that really connected. Delano, I saw you writing some notes during that section of the speech. What should be the role of race and privilege in this election?
I mean, I think Vivek hit the nail on the head, and the way I say it often is that the most privileged people in this country are children being raised by two married biological parents in a loving, low-conflict home. Point blank, period. Across gender, sex, race, religion, I think that should be the foundation of all conservative social policy. So, and when you combine that with, the notion that men particularly are responsible for the children that we create. I mean, Tucker didn't really touch on abortion that much with Vivek, But again, this is one of the issues that comes up, right? So often we make abortion a women's issue, but men have obviously a very important role to play as it relates to the creation of life. I think he did a tremendous job of hitting those points in terms of the importance of family. And I mean, when it comes to race, again, I respect. I think candidates should go wherever there are voters, right? Now I understand that people say, look, the one thing they're not making more of is time, so you have to allocate time according to your priorities. But I like seeing Vivek on the south side of Chicago. I like seeing him in Philadelphia. I like seeing him on the Breakfast Club, bringing his message to prospective voters, and they all may not vote for him, but at least he can say, I showed up, I listened, I spoke to people, I got a better sense of the issues. And one of the things that he brought up, and he was dead on, is that, I saw there was a group of voters in Chicago, black voters, who were criticizing their local government for prioritizing the needs of foreign nationals who come from other countries, end up in Chicago, and saying you are going to turn a high school in our neighborhood into a housing facility for people who've come into the country illegally. And what you heard when those people were speaking on the ground, they were saying things that the left typically calls replacement theory. And I think one of the things we need to understand is that these issues are not primarily about race. Every nation has the right to decide, who comes in, right, and under what circumstance. In the same way we all have homes and they have doors, or I'll use a different analogy. A family may say, look, we love our kids, but we're willing to adopt, some more children. And most people say, oh, wow, that's a great thing. But if I told my kids every single week we're going to adopt a new child, so by the end of the year we had 50 new kids in our house, I think they would have a right to say, well, Dad, what are we going to eat? Where are we going to sleep? And my answer can't be, well, me and your mom are pretty comfortable, so you guys should sort of figure it out. So I think Vivek hit on some of the most important issues. And I love how he tied it together by saying, look, we're running to say clearly with one voice what it means to be an American. I thought he did a fantastic job.
Matt, I want to get more for you in a second, but we got about 1 minute until Glenn is going to be interviewing Vivek Ramaswamy coming off stage right now. Can you give me a 1 minute quick reaction?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. If people out there, if you don't know about Vivek and now you do, well, you're welcome, right? I mean, he's very, very good at what he does. So he is actually, he says he's not a politician. I mean, he hasn't been one in the past. He's actually an excellent politician. He is very good at getting along with people about behind the scenes. He's very good at raising money and coalitions, I believe. And he's also, I've seen him for the last 2 years, been following him. He has been following very closely a lot of the best thinkers on the right. He's been following very closely what the issues actually are and what the possible solutions are. And he's sort of like a sponge. He's able to, he grabs all that information and then he internalizes it. He understands it, unlike a lot of these older politicians. And then he goes out there and he does what you saw him do, which is just lay it out there in a very articulate, fresh, compelling way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of politicians we see come seemingly with the desire for power and then look for an ideology.
Yes.
And that's the opposite of what Vivek has done. I mean, he wrote a book, he went into business, he did all these things beforehand, and has gotten into politics sort of as a second thing.
It's like he may be ambitious, but good. Because he's ambitious for the right reasons and the right issues, and he sees what those issues are. I really loved when he talked about the spiritual. He uses the word spiritual.
Yeah.
People, even if they're not religious, understand that we're in some kind of spiritual conflict right now. And again, he's able to identify that that's needed, that a positive goal is needed. What are we fighting for? He sees all that. So it's all up in there. And it comes out in a very articulate way. And I think he's pushing all the other candidates to be better. And that's what I love about him in this cycle. He's pushing everyone else to be sharper.
Yeah. We have Vivek Ramaswamy now with Glenn Beck. Let's throw it back over to Glenn.
Very much. Thanks, Stu. Vivek,
It's good to
great
see you,
job.
Glenn.
Good
Thank
to
you.
see you.
Thank you.
I will tell you, I've been here since 7 o'clock this morning, and the political talks have just gotten better and better. I think you did a really great job.
Thank you.
Again, we look at you, and you said some really difficult things to this crowd. You talked about the war, and you're the first one, I think, that has been very clear on not my child, not your child, going to fight. You said we just don't do it. How realistic is that?
I think it's very realistic, Glenn. And The fact is that there's an opportunity. I'm a big fan of using silver linings, even of bad decisions that have been previously made. I think most of the aid we've put into Ukraine, all of it, has been a bad choice. But here's what we can get out of it.
Hold on just a sec. Do you think it's a bad choice, or do you think? I think that we're not watching that money. I think that's a money laundering situation.
Oh, it is, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Okay.
I mean, I think I have my own views on Zelensky, and we can go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
But I care more about this country than just pointing out that
Sure,
problem.
sure,
but we could spend hours on that.
Yeah.
My point is, we can use this as an opportunity to accomplish a different and a more important strategic objective for the U.S., which is break apart the Russia-China alliance.
Yes.
That is what nobody's talking about. The top crowning achievement of the next president of the United States will be to disrupt that alliance. And now Ukraine gives us a chance to do it. So we do a deal that gives Putin the things that most Republicans and nearly all Democrats are unwilling to do. Freeze the current lines. Commit that NATO will never admit Ukraine. Not some path to joining. Never admit Ukraine. But in return, Putin has to exit his military partnership with China. We'll then reopen up economic relations with Russia. I think that's okay. I think that's a good thing. Then Putin has no reason to be Xi Jinping's little brother.
Right.
Which, by the way, deters China from going after Taiwan.
Right.
Because China's bet now is that the U.S. won't want to be at odds with two different nuclear allied superpowers.
Correct.
But if Russia's not in China's camp, now we have actually deterred China from going after Taiwan without going to war. Think about just the expansive nature of a simple foreign policy vision that nobody in either party is talking about. That's what I think we should be talking about.
You said today that on stage that you don't have a lot of experience. You don't have any experience running governments, et cetera, et cetera. Is that really necessary in today's world to have the experience? Is it honestly that different than running the world's largest corporation and reining it in and getting it right?
I think it is. I think the fact that it is different is a good thing. Because I think that one of the things that happens when you actually go through this totem pole and ladder of government is that you become acclimated to its ways. So I'm coming in with a clear-sighted view, Glenn, of shutting down most of the administrative state.
How realistic is that?
Very realistic. So first of all, do it on strong legal authority. So I'm a unique combination. I don't like to brag a lot, but I'm a CEO, but I've also studied the Constitution deeply. And the Supreme Court right now shares my view of the Constitution. The U.S. president already has statutory authority. The Presidential Reorganization Act of 1977 says you can shut down redundant agencies. Well, when I look at what the DEA does and what the U.S. Marshals do, there's my legal justification for shutting down the FBI without asking Congress for permission or forgiveness.
Jeez.
You know, there's another justification, stimulating the economy, also in that same statute. The $80 billion spent in the U.S. Department of Education, you know what? That would stimulate the economy to give it back to the people. That's my legal justification. So I understand the legal footing. By the way, what stopped Trump? The civil service protections, they said.
Correct.
Well, guess what? Read the law. Civil service protections protect against the individual firings of employees for supposedly political reasons. They do not apply to mass layoffs. And mass layoffs are absolutely what I'm bringing to Washington, D.C.
Would you lay it off, reform it, or close it down, these institutions?
Many agencies, I would just shut down the agencies. There's a certain list of other agencies where we have 75% headcount reduction plans.
Jeez.
And then there are other agencies which we move out of Washington, D.C., make people move. Many of them will volunteer not to. We save on the severance costs.
Who's your favorite president of the 20th century?
Of the 20th century? Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, no doubt
you
about it.
You should read his favorite was Calvin Coolidge, and what you just suggested was Calvin Coolidge.
This is vintage Coolidge. Coolidge is that's probably the only guy who was born on July 4th.
Yeah.
So he's a true American independence birthday man. That's part of why.
When you heard Kamala Harris, and nobody's talked about this, and I believe, and I think you probably do too, the biggest issue of our day is very soon going to be artificial intelligence.
It is.
When you heard our vice president say, AI is a very fancy word. It's 2 letters for 2 words.
Yeah. And the thing she says afterwards is it's basically
it's
machine
wrong.
learning is wrong.
It's wrong.
Right? ML and AI. So let's put aside the technical features of one woman's cognitive deficits, which would be too.
She's a first grader.
It's too small for us to waste time even talking about, right?
Yeah.
When you think about AI, so I have a clear vision on this. I think that outright bans are dangerous because we will adopt constraints that China will not adopt.
Correct.
We've done that before. Gain of function research. Guess what happens? It comes back and harms us.
And we do it in Black Ops.
And we do absolutely. And we funded that, by the way.
Yep.
So outright bans aren't the way to go. We don't have a ton of time, Glenn, but what I'll give you is the framework, and I'm the only candidate talking about this, is we have to create a framework of strict liability for the developers of any AI protocol for the consequences, including unintended consequences, of developing that protocol. So that gets the government out of the way, and it forces a company to be able to internalize the risk-benefit on their own. Microsoft, Meta, they're dead set opposed to this, right? Because they're in a race to achieve what you try to do in the tech world, create a moat, invest heavily before others are able to catch up. But if they have to take into account and be liable for the unintended consequences of what they create, they will have to internalize that in what they do. And the second constraint is protecting children. Children complete stop interface of AI's interface with children in ways that are pragmatic. So that's a general framework for me for how to handle this.
You are a former biotech CEO. When you look at the Department of Defense, the biggest benefactors of the budget from the Department of Defense, 5 out of the top 10 are big pharma.
Amazing.
Why is that? And why do you think that's dangerous?
It's
or
cronyism.
do you?
It's cronyism, absolutely. I mean, the merger of state power and private power, especially defense at that, to do through the back door what government couldn't do through the front door, this is crony capitalism at its worst. And so I think that big pharma is an industry, and I know this better than most, Glenn. I spent my entire career standing up to big pharma. It created a lot of inefficiencies that allowed me to build a successful company that called their bluff. But for our country, it is a tightly regulated industry, but it is also an industry that is run by government created monopoly.
Yes.
And that creates an industry that behaves like a government itself. So the first thing I would do is, let's say we roll back some of those cronyist privileges. Why are vaccine manufacturers specially exempt from liability when any other manufacturer bears product liability? That's just crony capitalism. And so I do think it takes somebody, whether it's on AI, whether it's on big pharma, that has some understanding of the actual substance, rather than taking it from an advisor managerial class, most of whom are captured by professional lobbyists on behalf of, big pharma to BlackRock to Silicon Valley. They understand how to capture the managerial class, but they cannot capture a president who has a deep first personal understanding of the Constitution and of the issues, including as they relate to technology. That's part of what motivates me to say that, you know what, this is why we're making the sacrifices to actually see this all the way through. Not in this just to make a point. I think it's going to take someone from the outside, but with that level of understanding, to address an era where the threats aren't as simple as they were in 1980. They're more complicated today.
Were you at all concerned, or are you at all concerned, about the acceptance of a Hindu as the president of the United States? I say this as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ. So that's not Christian enough for a lot of Christians. Have we passed that?
I think it depends on the person, right? I mean, whether you're a Christian or whether you're a person of a different faith. I understand this is a nation founded on Judeo-Christian values. And Glenn, I think I can say this with deep, honest conviction here. I share those same Judeo-Christian values more so than even many self-professed Christians across the country.
I agree with that.
And I also think that because I'm such a staunch defender of those shared values, nobody's going to accuse me of being a Christian nationalist as I do it. So it's actually true, though, because people feel there's almost a compunction that people feel, right? So it almost puts me at greater liberty than a Mike Pence or somebody else who's going to be labeled and put into some retrofitted box. I'm making faith and family and individual hard work and nation, I'm making these values cool again for the next generation, actually. I think these are cool. But my job is to actually reach that next generation with bringing those values and making them the values of progress for young people. And I think I can do that better because I'm younger, because my parents were immigrants to this country. No one's going to call me xenophobic or racist, not as easily at least. And yes, part of it is, yes, I'm a person of faith, but not raised in a tradition Christian household. I do have the benefit of having read the Bible thoroughly. I went to Catholic high school. Yep, absolutely. And I never felt like I was reading the Bible for the first time.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of these are deep-seated in the tradition that I was raised in. Sacrifice, duty, the idea that God put us here for a reason.
The true principles of America, the true principles, not the flag, the true principles are Judeo-Christian.
Yes, they
and
are.
so if you know this, you know the principles of the gospel.
And we share those values
Yeah.
in common. So I don't think that would be necessarily possible for an atheist, Glenn. I think that would be
that'd
a
be-
difficult bridge, and, and my answer to your question would be no. But for somebody who believes in a single God and that we are one nation under God and who is raised in a household deeply with those values, but still having some of the latitude to drive this change in our culture, I actually think I'm maybe best positioned to revive those Judeo-Christian shared values in our next generation.
You have a very bright future.
Thank you, Glenn. It's
Thank
good
you
to see
very
you.
much. Good to see you.
All right, well there you go. I'm really really appreciative that Glenn had the courage to ask that, because a lot of people aren't going to talk about the elephant in the room, especially acknowledging the rise of Christian nationalism. That it's not the far right or the extreme right. That's actually just the heritage of America is Christian nationalists. It's not sensational. It's not domestic terrorists. That's who America was for hundreds of years, Christian nationalists. So our platform is that, sorry, it really doesn't matter if you're aligned with us on abortion and aligned on us with there being one God and aligned with us on ending Ukraine and aligned with us on climate change being a hoax and all this other stuff. At the end of the day, if you can't acknowledge that God is Jesus Christ is God, Christ is King, King of Kings, and the only way to God is Jesus Christ, then that's a very dangerous precedent to set, to let somebody who will not acknowledge or agree with the statement that Jesus Christ was God, and thus everything in the New Testament, everything in the Gospels that Jesus said and told us how to live, doesn't come from a realm of nonfiction. It doesn't view Jesus' life as actually having happened and him actually being the Son of God. That's what this person being Hindu means. It means that they don't believe that Jesus was God. And that's a big, big problem, because it's saying that the instructions for life are not the gospel. The instructions for life are, I don't even know what the religious doctrine of Hinduism is, but I was watching the comments of people responding to the religion conversation, and look, there you go. Jayhawk11 says, not Judeo, just Christian. Jews are not on our side. So again, when you saw Glenn Beck sitting there bragging about how, hey, I'm asking you this question as a Christian, as a very devout Christian. I'm asking you, what's going on with this Hinduism thing? Do you think people are actually going to be okay with that? Because we have to be able to preserve Judeo-Christian values. Stop the record skip, skirt. What? Judeo-Christian values? What are you talking about? It's Christian values, not Judeo-Christian values. If you're trying to present an argument that Christianity evolved from Judaism, that's true. Christianity supplanted, it replaced Judaism as the proper way to live in lockstep with God, not in accordance to living through and the obedience of 613 different laws and all these rituals and sacrifices, but in purely placing your faith in God. And there's serious implications to a different religious doctrine being the moral framework for this individual. Even if they're claiming, hey, I practice Hinduism, but I understand I'm running America and America is a Christian country, so I have to run it the Christian way. That's kind of like what he was implying, that actually, guys, even though I'm Hindu, I can run America as a Christian society better than all of these Christians who just say they're Christian. That's dangerous language. That's really dangerous language. So he's a very good spokesman, and I think it's not to say that he's up there being dishonest when he's speaking or that he's trying to manipulate people, but Lucifer uses people the same way that God uses people. When he sees an efficacious use of somebody's lack of faith in Jesus Christ, he can use that and portray it in a very, very attractive way for everybody else. So he can say, oh, look at this guy who doesn't believe Jesus Christ, rejects the king, he's able to talk to people really, really well. And he is able to pitch his monotheistic views as if they're the same thing as Christianity. And he says all the right things about censorship and January 6th and not wanting to have these back to back to back wars and how the government is currently corrupt. He says all the right things. He has the right wrapping and packaging on the outside, but at the end of the day, so this is the conversation we as Christian nationalists have to have in saying, is it even remotely possible that we as Christian nationalists would vote for a candidate who is not Christian, doesn't follow Jesus Christ? I don't know. My answer, my knee-jerk reaction says no, we can't, because I know how Satan works. I know he's the master deceiver, the king of lies, and that he presents himself as an angel of light. That's the most important description of Satan you will ever hear. He presents himself as an angel of light, as if it's like, wow, this is who we've been waiting on to hear from. He's just so well spoken and he's saying all the right things, and it's almost too good to be true. You know, he's young and charismatic and he doesn't slip up and say offensive things. He's politically correct. This fixes all the problems with Donald Trump. And he's not as sleazy and as controlled as Ron DeSantis, somebody from the Republican donor class, because he's a self-financed billionaire. There's a lot of attractive things. He's the most attractive candidate, more so than Ron DeSantis, who is Christian, but we know is fully controlled by Israel. So it's like, it's Christian in name only. It's purely Republican in name only also, but I was very happy with that performance. It's always admirable to see somebody who's very good at what they do. And so even though he came up there and said, I'm not a politician, I don't have a background in being a politician, all that stuff is factually true, but it's kind of just a label. At the end of the day, who is a politician? There's somebody who are able to persuade the constituency, the voters, to nominate them to represent them in their best interest. That's who a politician is. It doesn't mean you have to be a legal expert. It doesn't mean you have to have been in student body, whatever, when you were in middle school and high school. It doesn't mean you had to be at the local level and at the state level first. It just means, can you listen to the people and serve them back their own interests? That's who a politician should be. And it's somebody who is able to work across the matrix of the government and to get teams who don't traditionally work well together to work well together. It's a people manager, but primarily the purpose of a politician is to represent their voters. And so he said everything that a lot of voters want our politician to say. So my guess is, coming out of this event, I should check, because this was recorded 2 days ago, I think. I should check and see what the polling numbers have said. I would have to imagine, I haven't seen Ron DeSantis' interview. We're going to knock that one out tomorrow because, like I said, I got to go get some dinner in me. But we'll do an episode tomorrow morning where we watch DeSantis' interview with Tucker and then look into how this entire event was received, what everybody else's opinion. But I'm guessing, barring Ron DeSantis having some kind of very different performance than he's had so many times before in town halls and whatnot, I don't think we're going to see anything from Ron DeSantis that's going to surprise us. He's going to talk about wokeism and he's going to talk about cancel culture. It'll be interesting to hear what he has to say about Ukraine, but my guess is the pressure is on him to say that he's against Ukraine. He's obviously against boots on the ground, but it should be implied that nobody's on board with boots on the ground. The only thing that's somewhat ambiguous would be, should we continue financial backing for this war? And the ideal candidate would say, no, not another penny. And I didn't hear that from Vivek. He talked about, he mentioned the spending once, that it needed to end, but it's kind of like, okay, does that mean taper it down? Does that mean if we spent $100 billion on this in the last year and a half, in the next year and a half, do you want to cut that in half? Do you want to cut that down to 25%? Or is it seriously, if I get into office, the day I get into office, there's not another dollar going to this war. We're pulling everybody out who's over there now, and that's it. Good luck, Ukraine. That would be the very clear, if I were running for president, answer. But anyway, that's going to do it for tonight. Thanks for joining me for the second session of today. We did a 4-hour session earlier and a 2.5-hour session this time. So a solid 6 hours of streaming today. It made my day. It was very fun. I'm glad this stream was made available for us. So shout outs to Blaze. Maybe I'll talk tomorrow a little bit more about the circus that we're watching and how much of this, and we talked about that a couple of times today. It's come up, especially when you start talking about the election integrity topic, that there's a strong chance that us watching this, whether it's the original broadcast or you guys watching me go over my coverage of it, that all of this doesn't even matter, that it's all just theater, it's all just circus rolled out for us to believe that we actually have some kind of influence. It's impossible for us to say, but at the end of the day, I was actually listening to the Serenity Prayer earlier. I finished my Bible study before the church, went into the church, did that, and I was listening to the Serenity Prayer on my way home. So I'd like to memorize that same way I memorized the Lord's Prayer. I remember the first verse of it. Let me see if I can get it. Lord, grant me the... Nope, can't do it. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change and the courage to change the things that I can. That's just the first verse. It goes on for like 6 more verses that I got to memorize still. But the very first verse of the Serenity Prayer is very important because it says something that many people say, well, you got to focus on what you can control. That's like actually a really important management topic that comes up if you get management training. I have a business management degree. It's part of that curriculum. If you don't get it through your education, you'll get it on the job when you take management training from your employer. They'll talk to you about how to manage your priorities. Well, your priorities have to be things that you can actually influence. If you have things on your priority list that you have no ability to impact the trajectory of, then you got it. They can't be your priorities. Those have to be God's priorities. And that's what the Serenity Prayer is about. It's about saying, let me take inventory of all the stuff I'm stressed about in my life. God, please help me have the serenity, meaning be okay with, be at zen with about these things that I can't control. And then give me the courage to address the things that I can control. Because there's a lot of times where we'd rather dwell on the thing we can't control as an excuse for not taking the initiative to fix the thing we can control. So that's why I'm trying to memorize the Serenity Prayer, to be able to say in times like that. And a lot of people don't know that that's biblical knowledge. The focus on what you can control versus what you can't. A lot of people think that's just like management talk or self-help talk that you might hear David Goggins say, or Tony Robbins say. And it is practical, useful knowledge, but not enough people know that that's biblical knowledge. If we all grew up reading the Bible regularly, we would already have that in our tool belt to respond to situations that feel overwhelming. But because people stop reading the Bible, it's not taught in schools. You're not allowed to talk about it in the workplace. People have stopped going to church. Therefore, people think it's like this profound nugget of wisdom when they discover it from whatever self-help guru. Oh, focus on the things I can control. That's good advice. Oh, well, maybe if you just actually prayed and interacted with God and read the Bible, you would have already known that. But anyway, that's enough ranting. Quick little mini sermon there. Do your Bible study. You need to. I read James today. It's a short book, but I read the whole thing and some editorial comments on it. Very, very good. Talked about the importance of prayer. So yeah. Anyway, I gotta go eat, man. I'm hungry. I want some chicken nachos. That's what we're gonna have. So thanks for hanging out with me for the second session of the day. I'll see you guys again tomorrow morning, and we'll go over that last interview with Ron DeSantis. Looking forward to it. Have a great night.